Hi, I'm Alex.
And I'm Danny.
And we're Seriously Nerdy
about Typeset. If you thought a miniature diorama inspired by a printing press is too abstract, then you might want to change the channel because we're about to get weird. But if you've made it this far, welcome! We recently found these typeset pieces at a thrift store and we thought they could inspire a pretty neat build. So here's the concept. We will use the typeset pieces to create furniture inside of a room, and then we'll reimagine these Russian soldier pieces as employees who are operating a printing press. We will house all those elements in a custom-designed diorama box, and along the way we will teach you unnecessary information about the typesetting process. So like it or not, you're about to learn some seriously nerdy stuff about printing presses. To get started, we kit bashed the different military figures into poses that would work in our scene. We basically swapped heads, torsos, and limbs in order to get a trio of employees who work at our printing press and are wearing these matching coveralls. After using green stuff putty to fill any gaps, we gave them a quick coat of primer before beginning their paint schemes. Now, back in the manual typesetting era, the employees who worked at a printing press were called compositors. They were the ones who physically set the type to create a printed page. Now, in order to do that, they had all of these letters on individual pieces called sorts. They would lay them out word by word, line by line, sentence by sentence into frames, and eventually all of those individual sorts would create a page that was then printed on top of. Now, the really complicated part of this is that all of the letters are backwards, so compositors were well known for being able to read backwards. That was part of their skill set.
Something that we would see is pretty easy today in a word processor, like, say, reducing or increasing the size of a font, would have been a highly manual process that would have involved completely resetting all of the sorts in a slightly different print size. Since the process of assembling all of the sorts into an entire page was so time-consuming, publishers who anticipated doing a number of reprints would make a mold of the entire page, which they would then cast in metal called a stereotype, which is where we get the term. While typesetting was a male-dominated industry for centuries, there are records of female typesetters going all the way back to the late 1400s, including a group of Dominican nuns in Florence, Italy, who ran their own convent press. And by the mid-1500s, women made up as much as 10% of London's printing workforce.
Sometimes when Alex and I have a concept for a project, we'll already have a piece in mind that the diorama can go inside, and sometimes we have the idea and no vessel, so we make our own. In this case, we use the Glowforge to create a little box that can house this printing press diorama, and we use the Glowforge to engrave these really fun typeset letters on the outside that bring the story happening inside to the exterior as well. Because of the size and scale of the diorama, we actually opted to have it open on two sides so that it could be viewed from both the front or the back, and we used some plexiglass windows to create both sides of the box. I opted to keep the masking on the plexiglass windows for now just to avoid any unnecessary scratches, and I also only installed the back wall of plexiglass and saved both the feet of the display as well as the front wall of plexiglass for the very end so that it was very easy to work and not get in my own way as I was building.
For the flooring in the diorama, we split a bunch of coffee stirrers in half and then cut them down to individual planks before gluing them all in place. For the uninitiated, coffee stirrers are really the most incredible piece of wood you can get for a diorama. They come in a nice standard size, they're very easy to work with. I cannot recommend them highly enough.
For the interior environment, we decided to take a little more of a stylized approach so that the figures and the printing press would really be the focus. In order to do this, we took our inspiration from the typeset sorts themselves, which are this very worn, antique, lived a whole life metal. So all of the elements inside the space will take their cue from them. I quickly 3D printed some super simple empty frames, and we happen to have these old lamp fixtures from some of the Christmas and Halloween houses. Everything was painted the same color of pewter and then distressed with some Nuln oil and washes. Then it was time to get really artsy by turning the typeface sorts into pieces of furniture for the room. So a bunch of sorts glued together looks sort of like a trunk. Some of the bigger sorts could be countertops or benches, and then some of these very skinny pieces that are for a very narrow typeface became shelves for the room. So it's literally furnished with typeset pieces, which is really fun because they were the entire inspiration for the build.
For the printing press itself, we found a 1/48 scale printing press kit online. Using a Prismacolor dark brown marker, I went ahead and stained all of it a darker wooden brown, and then cut out the first few pieces using an X-Acto knife. Initially, I tried sanding the edges of all of the wooden pieces to get rid of the burn marks, but this proved futile, considering the scale we were working at. We had to take a brief break for an inspection by our supervisor, but fortunately, she determined that everything was up to code. Danny and I were delighted to find this 1/48 scale kit on True to Scale, a company that specializes in doing scale model kits. They aren't sponsoring this video or anything, we just like them. If you're like me and enjoy the meticulous process of following instructions and then gluing tiny things together, then this is probably the right type of kit for you. You should definitely check it out. Once the entire left side was assembled, it was then just a matter of gluing on the right side and making sure that everything fit into its appropriate slots.
As we thought about the size of the room and the style of printing press, it became clear that we needed a storyline to tie everything together. The compositors are wearing a coverall that puts them somewhere in the 20th century, but the 20th century would likely have more than one printing press, or at the very least a more modern style of printing press, as opposed to this classic Gutenberg style. So we were inspired by French resistance newspapers of the 1940s, which were often printed, as you might expect, by small groups of people looking to get information out during times of conflict. So the tiny newspapers you see here are miniature copies of a French resistance newspaper in the 1940s, and we loved this idea that maybe this is a group of like-minded individuals gathering to spread information even at times when the press may be silenced or suppressed. I think it's fascinating to think about the life that these typeset pieces had before they ended up in this diorama. What did they print? What did they communicate? And hopefully this is a fitting place for them to spend their final years as a tribute to the power of people and communication and free press. So with all of the elements glued inside, it was finally time to put the roof on the diorama and also glue on its little feetsies. Now, as we were putting the finishing touches on the diorama, I realized that the plexiglass was not quite meeting the wood at the top and bottom the way that I had hoped. But not to worry, I was able to take very thin strips of contact paper in the same shade of the wood and place those in the tops and bottoms to just make everything look a little more finished. Well, that's all from us for this time. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't already done so, and we will see you on the next video.